Okay, hello. I think we're live. I'm Jimmy. Welcome to Philosophy for Everyday Life. This is Philosophy Hour and the series Kant for Everyone. Um, just check on everything to make sure we're good. Hey, welcome. I see your comment. Nice to have you here. I'm just going to make sure I have everything lined up. Okay. I'm going to jump in. I'll just mention again, the topic of the live stream fits with the German video. Yes, Nietzsche and Plato, it does. Yeah, really glad to have you back. Also, I'm realizing the way that these live streams replay, it does not show the comments. And I'm not sure why I haven't been able to enable that setting. It's something I'll have to figure out, but I'll try to read the comments out loud so that it's clear for later viewers. But the comment was, the topic of this live stream fits with the German video I once sent you after the last live stream regarding the discussion between Nietzsche and Plato. Yes, and so today we are going to get into Kant and Plato together a little bit. Yeah, let's jump in. So I've talked a lot about some key distinctions that we find in Kant across the previous installments in this series, especially distinctions like the ones between empirical and intelligible, a priori and a posteriori, and appearances versus things in themselves. If you just want to take a look here, this is a list I made during the previous live stream. And Kant says in the preface to the second edition, which we've been reading, that the empirical and the intelligible are two modes of representation. All these terms I've lined up here are not exact equivalents, but they're associated with each other. These are parallel distinctions that Kant makes between the empirical and the intelligible, the a posteriori and the a priori, the contingent and the necessary, phenomena and noumena, appearances and things in themselves. These terms don't mean precisely the same things, but they overlap or have important relationships, each set of terms in each column. We'll come back to this in a moment. So we could spend a long time tracing these distinctions through the history of philosophy. But I think it's helpful to go back to Plato and Aristotle to get some extra context, because I think this will help us understand where Kant gets his terms, what's unique about what he's doing, and what is not unique. I think we'll find throughout Kant's work that he takes well-established concepts in philosophy and does surprising things with them. This is part of what makes Kant's work so revolutionary and radical. It's not that he ignores or discards prior philosophical work. Kant shows incredible awareness of the entire range of philosophical positions that preceded him. What makes Kant so interesting is that he rearranges or reconfigures standard philosophical terms in highly innovative ways. Incidentally, I think this is a good model to follow for anyone wanting to do original work in any field. True originality, generally speaking, is only possible after one has mastered the work of others. Otherwise, attempts at originality tend to repeat previous work unwittingly, including mistakes. So whatever one may think of Kant, it seems undeniable to me that he approached classic philosophical problems in highly original ways by having mastered the solutions proposed by others. That being the case, I think it's also helpful to take a look at previous discussions of some of the problems that Kant addresses in order to see how Kant is both dependent on his predecessors and departing from them in key ways. So I want to start by underlining that the terms we find in Plato and Aristotle do not mean exactly the same things as the terms we find in Kant, even when English translations use exactly the same words. It might seem that this would only make the problem or the challenge of understanding Kant more difficult. Why not just focus on one author at a time? I do see the sense in this objection, and I admit it's probably the more common approach, just to take one author. But in defense of my own method, I want to go back to the idea, which I've repeated in each of these live streams, I think, that learning to read philosophy is like learning a language. Words take on meaning through a whole network of contexts in which those words are used. And part of what makes philosophy so difficult is that it's an extended conversation across 25 centuries and many languages, including Greek, Latin, English, German, and French. Someone has said that the history of philosophy is a history of creative misinterpretations. This seems true. It also seems inevitable, especially when we are dealing with the attempt to wrestle with the same questions and concepts using different words across different languages across a very long period of time. Moses Mendelssohn, who was one of the authors I focused on in my dissertation, in addition to Kant, captures this challenge of understanding philosophical terms or the language of philosophy in a famous passage from his work, Jerusalem, about the difficulty of mutual comprehension in philosophy, even between close friends. Mendelssohn writes, "My neighbor and I cannot possibly connect the very same words with the very same internal sensations," by which he kind of means internal meanings or how we're using the words, "for we cannot compare them, liken them to one another, and correct them without again resorting to words." So we can't compare the way each of us is using words and what we mean in our minds by those words, because the only way we can tell each other what's in our minds is by using more words. So Mendelssohn continues, "With my best friend, whom I believed to be ever so much in accord with me, I very often failed to come to terms about certain truths of philosophy and religion. After a long dispute and altercation, it would sometimes emerge that we had each connected different ideas with the same words. Not infrequently, we thought alike, yet expressed ourselves differently. But just as often, we believed ourselves to be in agreement when we were still very far apart in our thoughts. And yet, neither of us was unpracticed in thinking. We were both used to dealing with abstract ideas, and it seemed to both of us that we were earnestly seeking the truth for its own sake, rather than for the sake of scoring a point." So Mendelssohn is saying, even with my best friend, who, by the way, is an accomplished philosopher just like me, who I know is seeking the truth, not trying to win an argument, and who has a lot of practice in this sort of thing, not to mention we've had these conversations many times. Even in this case, I've found that we disagree, or we think we disagree, because we're using the same words with different meanings. And at the same time, sometimes we also think we're in agreement when actually we disagree for the same reason, because we're using the same words with different meanings. So he's highlighting this challenge of all philosophical discourse. And it goes back to this idea that the history of philosophy is a series of creative misinterpretations. I think this is true when you look at the way that someone like Nietzsche reads Kant, for example. Extremely creative and generative, and also, I think, a misinterpretation on some key points. We have another comment. "Furthermore, each philosopher uses their own vocabulary that one always has to learn anew." Yeah, exactly. They're using their own vocabulary, but a lot of times they are reusing terms from other philosophers. Another example is, this term, the things themselves. Kant says you cannot know things in themselves. You can think them, you can recognize in your mind that they exist, or that it's possible for them to exist, but you can't have knowledge of things in themselves. All you ever have knowledge of is appearances. In phenomenology, 100 or so years after Kant's death, the sort of mantra or battle cry was, "to the things themselves." Well, they're using a term that Kant uses, but in a very different way, because Kant would never have said, you should try to pay attention to the things themselves. He would say, no, that's impossible. So the same term is being used, but in quite different ways. Hello, B. Wilder. Welcome back. Good to see you. Okay, so I'll continue on just a little bit here with this sort of intro. So we're talking about this problem of understanding philosophical terminology, not only within an author like Kant, but across the whole history of philosophy. And it might seem that we make the problem worse by bringing in other philosophers. But I think part of what helps us understand is when we find that someone like Kant is taking these words and doing something new with them, doing something creative or that sort of goes against the ways that the words were previously used. That's part of the meaning of the words as Kant is using them. And if we're not attuned to the earlier uses of the words, we're going to miss part of Kant's meaning because we won't see what he's not doing or what he's not saying. So that's what I have in mind here. We're going to start with Plato's Republic and look after that at a few passages from Aristotle. We may not get to Kant's preface today, which is taking a surprisingly long time to get through. This is now episode 6, and we are still on the preface to the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason. But here we go. So this is from book 6 of Plato's Republic. And let me just, before I start, I'm going to turn back to these distinctions. We have the empirical and the intelligible. My pen is not working. Well, got it. Writing may be out for today. Maybe it's not charged. Let it sit there for a moment. Okay. The key idea here is we have this distinction between the empirical and the intelligible. And we're going to talk right now about the words phenomena and noumena, which are basically Greek words. Phenomena means things that appear, and noumena means things that are intelligible or things that are understood. And this is a key distinction in Plato as well. We'll see how Plato uses this distinction and also how he lines it up with concepts like understanding and belief, which are also key for Kant. And if you remember last time we talked about the distinction, or Kant says he had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith or belief. It will be interesting to think about how Kant uses this word belief, what he wants to do with it, and how Plato uses it. Another comment, a very good example of this is the well-known term coined by Nietzsche, Übermensch, overman. He invented his own word and imbued it with meaning himself. That is an excellent example, because there Nietzsche was really trying to do something truly groundbreaking in a different way than what I've been saying, not in a way of innovating on his predecessors, but in a way of truly overturning everything. Yeah, that's a great example. Okay, so we can turn now to Plato. Yeah, yes. Phenomena is, this word phenomena is the basis for the word phenomenology. This is another question. Does this have anything to do with the well-known word phenomenology? Yes, it does. And I think what's happening in phenomenology is that they're bracketing or setting aside Kant's question about things in themselves, and actually in a way collapsing the distinction, because phenomenology says the phenomena are the things themselves in a way. Whatever appears to consciousness is what phenomenology attends to, and what appears is the things in themselves. Kant would say what appears to consciousness is different than the things in themselves. It's a bit of a tangent to unpack that all the way, but that's the basic idea. Okay, so Plato is talking about beautiful things, the good in itself. Let's start up at the top of this page. This is Socrates and Glaucon discussing. Who is this speaking? So we'll start here. By God, Socrates, Glaucon said, don't desert us with the end almost in sight. We'll be satisfied if you discuss the good as you discussed justice, moderation, and the rest. So Glaucon is inviting Socrates to discuss the good. Not just good things, but the good, the form of the good. That, my friend, I said, Socrates said, would satisfy me too, but I'm afraid that I won't be up to it and that I'll disgrace myself and look ridiculous by trying. So let's abandon the quest for what the good itself is for the time being, for even to arrive at my own view about it is too big a topic for the discussion we are now started on. But I am willing to tell you about what is apparently an offspring of the good, and most like it. Is that agreeable to you? Or would you rather we let the whole matter drop? It is. The story about the father remains a debt you'll pay another time. I wish that I could pay the debt in full, and you receive it instead of just the interest. So here then is this child and offspring of the good. But be careful that I don't somehow deceive you unintentionally by giving you an illegitimate account of the child. We'll be as careful as possible, so speak on. I will when we've come to an agreement and recalled some things that we've already said both here and many other times. Which ones? We say that there are many beautiful things and many good things, and so on for each kind, and in this way we distinguish them in words. We do. And beauty itself, and good itself, and all the things that we thereby set down as many, reversing ourselves, we set down according to a single form of each, believing that there is but one, and call it the being of each. That's true. And we say that the many beautiful things and the rest are visible, but not intelligible, while the forms are intelligible but not visible. Okay, so we'll want to write this down. And I think my pen might be working now. So Plato says, no, not yet. Let me double check on this. Tap to connect. I think I got it now. The many beautiful things are visible, not intelligible, while the forms are intelligible but not visible. We'll leave it there for the moment. We have a question. How does Immanuel Kant's idea of morality differ from Aristotle's virtue ethics? Good question. That will require its own video, and I have some thoughts on that. I would say it differs less dramatically than is typically thought. I think Kant is a virtue ethicist in his own way. In a nutshell, I think Aristotle thinks that ethics is kind of a fuzzy discipline. Just by the nature of the material, there aren't rigorous demonstrative principles in ethics, and Kant disagrees with that. I think that's the key difference. Kant thinks that there are certain apodictically necessary moral principles, but my opinion is that they are both virtue ethicists, but they disagree in that key way. But I'll have to dedicate a whole session to that sometime. Thank you for the question. So let's return to Plato. He's talking about the many beautiful things being visible but not intelligible, while the forms are intelligible but not visible. Now this is starting to line up with Kant's distinction between the empirical, the visible, the things that can be experienced, and the intelligible, or appearances and things in themselves, or phenomena and noumena. So Glaucon says that's completely true. With what part of ourselves do we see visible things? With our sight. And so audible things are heard by hearing, and with our other senses we perceive all the other perceptible things. That's right. Have you considered how lavish the maker of our senses was in making the power to see and be seen? I can't say I have. Well, consider it this way. Do hearing and sound need another kind of thing in order for the former to hear and the latter to be heard? A third thing, in whose absence the one won't hear or the other be heard? No, they need nothing else. And if there are any others that need such a thing, there can't be many of them. Can you think of one? I can't. You don't realize that sight and the visible have such a need. He's saying there's something unique about sight and the visible that's different from other senses. How so? Sight may be present in the eyes, and the one who has it may try to use it, and colors may be present in things, but unless a third kind of thing is present, which is naturally adapted for this very purpose, you know that sight will see nothing, and the colors will remain unseen. What kind of thing do you mean? I mean what you call light. So he's saying your eyes can be working well, and there can be objects around which are visible, but if there's no light, the eyes won't be able to see the objects. Glaucon says you're right. And Socrates continues, then it isn't an insignificant kind of link that connects the sense of sight and the power to be seen. It is a more valuable link than any other linked things have got, if indeed light is something valuable. And of course, it's very valuable, Glaucon says. So Socrates says, which of the gods in heaven would you name as the cause and controller of this, the one whose light causes our sight to see in the best way and the visible things to be seen? The same one you and others would name. Obviously, the answer to your question is the sun. So they are saying that the sun is a god who sheds light and enables this power of sight. We have the capability of seeing, but we aren't able to exercise it without this extra thing, this third thing, which is light, which is attributed here to the sun. And isn't sight by nature related to that God in this way? Which way? Sight isn't the sun, neither sight itself nor that in which it comes to be, namely the eye. No, it certainly isn't. But I think that it is the most sun-like of the senses, very much so. And it receives from the sun the power it has, just like an influx from an overflowing treasury. So he's saying that vision, this power of sight, receives from the sun just like an influx from this overflowing treasury. There's you can sense that he's already moving away from physical sight towards something like intellectual sight. Intellectual sight receives an influx from, not from the physical sun, but from a kind of intellectual sun, which is, he's going to say, is the form of the good. I'm anticipating a little bit, but he's going to draw an analogy between physical sight and intellectual sight. The sun is not sight, but isn't it the cause of sight itself and seen by it? That's right. Let's say then that this is what I call the offspring of the good, which the good begot as its analog. So he's performing a kind of analogical reasoning. He's taking one thing that we understand and using it to help us understand, or to think about a different thing that we don't understand. What the good itself is in the intelligible realm, in relation to understanding and intelligible things, the sun is in the visible realm, in relation to sight and visible things. Okay, so let's just briefly note that here. The many beautiful things, visible, not intelligible. Here we have the sun. And on the other side, we have the good itself. Glaucon says, how? Explain a bit more. Socrates says, you know that when we turn our eyes to things whose colors are no longer illuminated by the light of day, but by night lights, the eyes are dimmed and seem nearly blind, as if clear vision were no longer in them. Of course. Yet whenever one turns them on things illuminated by the sun, they see clearly, and vision appears in those very same eyes. Indeed. Well, understand the soul in the same way. So now he's going to make the analogy. When it focuses on something illuminated by truth and what is, it understands, knows, and apparently possesses understanding. But when it focuses on what is mixed with obscurity, on what comes to be and passes away, it opines and is dimmed, changes its opinions in this way and that, and seems bereft of understanding. Let's note this here, what comes to be and passes away. In other words, things that change. That's what goes over here. Things that change. And here are unchanging things. And Plato thinks we can really only have understanding of things that don't change. Whereas this is going to be something different. He uses the word opines, opinion. We can have opinion about things that change, but we can only really have true knowledge about things that are unchanging. Glaucon says it does seem that way, and Socrates continues, so that what gives truth to the things known and the power to know to the knower is the form of the good. What gives truth to the things known. You are welcome for answering the question. Yes. And yeah, I agree. It's a nice analogy. It's very interesting. Another question, if the good gives power to know, like the sun gives light, does it mean knowledge is impossible without the good? Yeah, I think that is exactly what Plato or Socrates is saying here, is that the good is the thing that enables knowledge. And it's interesting, this phrase he uses here, what gives truth to the things known. It's common to think of truth as, say, like a feature of a statement. You know, the statement is true if the meaning of the statement corresponds to some fact or some reality, something about the world. But giving truth to a thing known is a very different way of thinking about what truth is. It's almost like it's a quality of a reality, almost. I think Martin Heidegger picks up on things like this in his way of thinking about truth. So that what gives truth to the things known and the power to know to the knower is the form of the good. And though it is the cause of knowledge and truth, it is also an object of knowledge. So just like the sun enables us to see all the other objects, we can also look directly at the sun. Socrates is saying the form of the good enables us to know all other things, but we can also look at the form directly. It can also be an object of knowledge. Both knowledge and truth are beautiful things, but the good is other and more beautiful than they. In the visible realm, light and sight are rightly considered sun-like, but it is wrong to think that they are the sun. So here it is right to think of knowledge and truth as good-like, but wrong to think that either of them is the good, for the good is yet more prized. Glaucon says, this is an inconceivably beautiful thing you're talking about, if it provides both knowledge and truth and is superior to them in beauty. You surely don't think that a thing like that could be pleasure. Hush, let's examine its image in more detail as follows. How? This is Socrates. You'll be willing to say, I think, that the sun not only provides visible things with the power to be seen, but also with coming to be, growth, and nourishment, although it is not itself coming to be. So again, this distinction between things that change and things that don't change. The sun does not change, but on Socrates' view, but it enables growth of things on earth. In the same way, the form of the good does not change, but it enables the change that takes place in other things. How could it be? Another question. Is the good here like truth itself, or is it something even higher than truth? He said something like this. It gives truth. It is right to think of knowledge and truth as good-like, but wrong to think that either of them is the good. So I think he's saying the good is something even higher than truth. So Socrates continues here, therefore you should also say that not only do the objects of knowledge owe their being known to the good, their being known to the good, but their being is also due to it, although the good is not being, but superior to it in rank and power. The good is not being, so even being, the good somehow transcends being. And Glaucon comically said, by Apollo, what a daemonic superiority. It's your own fault. You forced me to tell you my opinion about it. And I don't want to stop you either. So continue to explain its similarity to the sun if you've omitted anything. I'm certainly omitting a lot. Well, don't, not even the smallest thing. I think I'll have to omit a fair bit, but as far as is possible at the moment, I won't omit anything voluntarily. Don't. Understand, then, that as we said, there are these two things, one sovereign of the intelligible kind and place, the other of the visible. I don't say of heaven, so as not to seem to you to be playing the sophist with the name. In any case, you have two kinds of thing, visible and intelligible, right? It's like a line divided into two unequal sections. Then divide each section, namely that of the visible and that of the intelligible, in the same ratio as the line. In terms now of relative clarity and opacity, one subsection of the visible consists of images. Okay, so I'm going to do this in my little diagram. We already have one line. We have the many beautiful things. Let's do it here, the visible and the intelligible. Now, let's pretend all this stuff up at the top. These are just descriptions, but we're going to make a box here to kind of do what Plato's doing. He's saying, actually, I think we want to make a new page here. So, visible, intelligible. This is not as neat as I wish it were, but and now we're gonna do it like this: clear, opaque. Maybe we'll want to modify these as we go, but that's a good starting point. We're gonna have 4 different things. So we're gonna talk about relative clarity and opacity in these visible and intelligible realms. One subsection of the visible consists of images, and here we have a nice little footnote that helps us out. And by images, I mean first shadows, then reflections in water, and in all close-packed, smooth, and shiny materials, and everything of that sort, if you understand. I do. And the other subsection of the visible, put the originals of those images, namely the animals around us, all the plants, and the whole class of manufactured things. Consider them put. So let's go back to our diagram. In the visible, we have things that are opaque. Maybe that's not the best word, but images, or we could also call them representations or copies. And here we have the originals. The things that in the lower box, the things that the items in the lower box are copies or representations or images of. So we'll go back to the text. Socrates says, would you be willing to say that as regards truth and untruth, the division is in this proportion? As the opinable is to the knowable, so the likeness is to the thing that it is like. Okay, so now he's not just talking about the things that go in the box, but what kind of relationship do we as knowers have to those things? So what he's saying is here, this is the realm of opinion, things that we opine about. Whereas here, this is the realm of knowledge. I have room for that in here, so we'll do that. Knowledge. Socrates now says, consider how the section of the intelligible is to be divided. So we're going to do the same thing for the intelligible. How? As follows. In one subsection, the soul, using as images the things that were imitated before, is forced to investigate from hypotheses, proceeding not to a first principle, but to a conclusion. In the other subsection, however, it makes its way to a first principle that is not a hypothesis, proceeding from a hypothesis, but without the images used in the previous subsection, using forms themselves and making its investigation through them. I don't yet fully understand what you mean. Let's try again. You'll understand it more easily after the following preamble. I think you know that students of geometry, calculation, and the like hypothesize the odd and the even, the various figures, the three kinds of angles, and other things akin to these in each of their investigations, as if they knew them. So they're just hypothesizing. They make these their hypotheses and don't think it necessary to give any account of them, either to themselves or to others, as if they were clear to everyone. And going from these first principles through the remaining steps, they arrive in full agreement. I certainly know that much. Then you also know that although they use visible figures and make claims about them, their thought isn't directed to them, but to those other things that they are like. They make their claims for the sake of the square itself, the diagonal itself, not the diagonal they draw, and similarly with the others. These figures that they make and draw, of which shadows and reflections in water are images, they now in turn use as images, in seeking to see those others themselves that one cannot see except by means of thought. So he's saying we kind of make these hypotheses using, say, like a drawing of a triangle in geometry in order to arrive at a necessary truth, say, about the principles of a triangle. This is visible, using these visible objects. I don't want to put that in parentheses because that's what I did for knowledge up there. Visible. So visible things are being used to arrive at invisible truths. I think this will get clearer as we go. That's true, Glaucon says. And Socrates continues, this then is the kind of thing that on the other hand I said is intelligible. On the one hand I said is intelligible, and on the other is such that the soul is forced to use hypotheses in the investigation of it, not traveling up to a first principle since it cannot reach beyond its hypotheses, but using as images those very things of which images were made in the section below, and which by comparison to their images were thought to be clear and to be valued as such. In other words, these originals in the visible realm come over here and become images in the intelligible realm, which are then used to understand the originals that are not visible in the intelligible realm. So we have a sort of analogous relationship between copy and original. Another question, when Plato says mathematicians think about the square itself and not the drawn square, is he talking about ideal forms? Yeah, I think so. He's talking about the form of the square or the necessary mathematical, geometrical features of the square, which we know through our intellect, through our understanding. And when we draw out the square, it's just to help us understand those sort of rational truths which are not visible. Glaucon says, I understand that you mean what happens in geometry and related sciences. And Socrates continues, then also understand that by the other subsection of the intelligible, I mean that which reason itself grasps by the power of dialectic. It does not consider these hypotheses as first principles, but truly as hypotheses, but as stepping stones to take off from, enabling it to reach the unhypothetical first principle of everything. We have a question, could you explain about the copy and the original? Yeah, let me read out this last bit and then we'll return and try to clarify that. Thank you for the question. Having grasped this, so it uses these hypotheticals to reach the unhypothetical first principle of everything. Having grasped this principle, it reverses itself and keeping hold of what follows from it comes down to a conclusion without making use of anything visible at all, but only of forms themselves, moving on from forms to forms and ending in forms. I'm going to skip this paragraph and just get to this last one here. Your exposition is most adequate, Glaucon says. Thus, there are four such. Oh no, that's Socrates responding to Glaucon, I think. There are four such conditions in the soul corresponding. Maybe I should read this. Okay, Glaucon says, I understand, if not yet adequately, for in my opinion you're speaking of an enormous task, that you want to distinguish the intelligible part of that which is, the part studied by the science of dialectic, as clearer than the part studied by the so-called sciences. Oh my gosh, Andrew Corder. Hey, how Plato thinks he can know the good, which while unchanging can only be grasped through analogy, which never comprehends the whole and therefore can't be known. I think you're right, and I think Plato's dodgy on this, because I think there are times when he says, I don't know the good. I can't know it. So I think in a way what he's doing is offering us a kind of second best. Like we can't look at the good directly. Well, we can try, but our knowledge of it is always going to be inadequate, but we can try to speak about it using these analogies. That's my best attempt at the moment to answer that question, but I think it's a fundamental question. So Glaucon is saying, you want to distinguish the intelligible part of that which is as clearer than the part studied by the so-called sciences, for which their hypotheses are first principles. By the sciences, he means something like geometry. And although those who study the objects of these sciences are forced to do so by means of thought rather than sense perception, still, because they do not go back to a genuine first principle but proceed from hypotheses, you don't think that they understand them, even though, given such a principle, they are intelligible. And you seem to me to call the state of the geometers thought, but not understanding, thought being intermediate between opinion and understanding. This is important for understanding Kant specifically. Socrates says, your exposition is most adequate. Thus, there are four such conditions in the soul, corresponding to the four subsections of our line. Understanding for the highest, thought for the second, belief for the third, and imaging for the last. Arrange them in a ratio and consider that each shares in clarity to the degree that the subsection is set over shares in truth. Okay, we can come back to this footnote here. So we have understanding. This is for the highest realm, the realm of the good. We have thought, which is for what the geometers are doing when they draw the square. We have belief, which is for just ordinary objects in the world. And we have imagination, which is for copies of objects in the world. And if we map this onto this grid, here we have understanding. Here we have thought. I think I was probably not quite right to call this knowledge here. Because Plato is using the word belief. In here, opinion, or he just used the word imaging. Okay. So this was quite a detour through some dense work of Plato to try to understand Kant. Was it worth it? If you go back to the previous live stream, which was on this really important and famous line in the preface to the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant says that he has to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. Faith can also be translated belief. So the first thing I want to point out is that Kant is using the same kind of set of options for thinking about, Plato called it a condition of the soul, which is not a bad way to think about it. What is the relationship of the knowing self or the knowing consciousness to the thing that it is conscious of? Well, in some cases, we have something that's has a high degree of clarity. That's the term Plato is using. And that applies only to this intelligible realm, these very absolutely first principles. And Plato calls that understanding. Kant would probably call that knowledge. And if you remember, Kant wants to say, um, Kant actually wants to take this term knowledge and apply it here. Kant's going to say we can only have true knowledge of of phenomena, of things that we can hold or have in experience. Kant does something very surprising and very radical when he says, okay, but this idea of belief, that's actually pretty useful. Kant connects it up with practical reason, and he calls it, in translations, we find the word faith. And Kant says, actually, you can't have understanding over here. Not possible. It goes beyond the bounds of sense, beyond the limits of reason. But practical reason enables us to have a different relationship to these ultimate first principles, and we can actually have belief or faith over here. So Kant, in a sense, is swapping the relationship between belief and belief and knowledge or understanding. He's doing the exact opposite of what Plato does. Whereas Plato says we have knowledge or belief of the highest things, knowledge or understanding of the highest things, and belief of objects in the world. Kant says, no, we have knowledge of objects of sensation, things that we experience, but we can only have belief about the highest realities. Now that's wild. It's a remarkable reversal to take these terms and to completely reverse them in this way. Okay, let me come back to this question. So I still don't understand which part is the copy and which is the original. So let me see if I can diagram this more clearly. Let's start at the bottom here with like an image of a landscape. Should pretend like, the sun rising over some water. It's a painting. And that's a copy. It's a copy of an actual sunrise. So this is the original. So that's the first copy original relationship. And what Kant wants, or I'm saying what Plato is saying is, take this original. Let's do it again. This actual real life sunrise. Now I'm running out of space. Pretend there's another thing up here that it's a copy of, which is darn it. I lost my menu options there. There we go. He's going to say the form of the good. That this actual real life sunrise is a copy of beauty itself, of goodness itself, of truth itself. Hi, I see your question. Will this be watchable later on? It will. Yes, it will be up. And thanks for jumping in. Glad to have you here. So, I hope this clarifies a little bit. And if we go back, so let's number these. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have images then we have originals of those images. Those originals are over here, images of an even higher level of originality. Another comment, Plato says dialectic reaches an unhypothetical first principle. How can something be known without any hypothesis? Doesn't all reasoning start with assumptions? Yeah. Imagine it's something like this. We're trying to think about the nature of a square. I say, suppose this is a square, and I draw a square on a piece of paper. Here's our hypothesis. Suppose there's a thing like this. Now we can start reasoning about it, and we can reason up to first principles about this thing, and get to things that are no longer hypotheses, but we can discover that the two sides are the same, and we can discover that all the angles are the same. And these are no longer hypotheses. These become rationally necessary truths that are that we can sort of grasp with our reason in a necessary way. So we work from the hypothesis of a square, the supposition of a square, up to necessary truths about it. And it sounds like this question about copies and originals is answered to satisfaction. So I'm glad to hear that. And thanks for the question. It's a really essential question for all of this. And you're right. So to speak, the thing itself, that which can be perceived, and the image in our head. Yeah. Okay. So just to continue on with the numbering, this is number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. And about number 1, we have opinion. About number 2, we have belief. About number 3, we have, what did he call that? We have thought. And about number 4, we have understanding. And the key thing all of this has been driving out for the purposes of understanding Kant is that Kant says understanding comes down here and belief comes up here. He switches number 2 and number 4. So we're at nearly an hour. That took even longer than I expected. I think the sections from Aristotle, however, are relatively short, so I think we can tackle them still. And thanks for your comment, Philosophy for a Small Planet. I love that handle. Yeah, I hope you come back and watch, and good luck with your work. Okay, so a quick look at a couple further texts. So I'm going to go back to actually, let's stay here. If we come all the way back to this is our list of terms, kind of parallel terms from the work of Kant. We have the empirical and the intelligible. This is what we've been talking about, the empirical or the visible versus the intelligible in Plato. Closely related to this is the idea of the a posteriori, the posterior, and the a priori, the prior. Now, where did these terms come from, and what do they mean? They don't mean exactly the same thing as the empirical and the intelligible, but they're related. And for this, we'll turn to Aristotle. There we go. This is the table of contents to the complete works of Aristotle. And I just want to draw your attention to these two highlighted works, prior analytics and posterior analytics. If we turn to these works themselves, they don't give us a lot of clarity on exactly how Aristotle is using these terms. But he does clarify in some other locations. This is from his work, The Categories, where he tells us exactly how he uses this idea of the prior. And he says, one thing is called prior to another in 4 ways. We have one more question. If dialectic alone reaches the ultimate first principle beyond hypotheses, how does the mind justify that this principle is true without any prior assumption? Thank you. I think Plato would say when you get to these very first ultimate principles, there's a kind of self-evident force to them, just in the way that when you look at the sun, it overwhelms your sight or your vision with its power. When you are able to lift the eye of your mind to the form of the good, the question of justification probably drops off. But I'm not totally confident about that answer. I think we'd need to spend some more time looking at the texts and unpacking this. But that's my best preliminary answer as of now. So this idea of the prior. First and most strictly in respect of time. So something can be prior to another temporally, as when one thing is called older or more ancient than another, for it is because the time is longer that it is called either older or more ancient. Secondly, what does not reciprocate as to implication of existence. That's abstract, but he gives an example. For example, 1 is prior to 2, because if there are 2, it follows at once that there is 1. Whereas if there is 1, there are not necessarily 2, so that the implication of the other's existence does not hold reciprocally from 1, and that from which the implication of existence does not hold reciprocally is thought to be prior. So let's write out what we have so far. Four ways of being prior. Time. Say prior in time. Here we can say implying the existence of. So 1 does not imply the existence of 2, but 2 does imply that there is 1. If we have 2 chairs, we know necessarily that we also have 1 chair, that there is a 1 chair there. But if we have 1 chair, we don't know that there is necessarily a second chair. That's what he's saying with this second example. Thirdly, a thing is thought to be a thing is called prior in respect of some order, as with sciences and speeches. For in the demonstrative sciences, there is a prior and posterior in order. For the elements are prior in order to the constructions, and in grammar, the elements are prior to the syllables. Likewise, with speeches, for the introduction is prior in order to the exposition. Further, besides the ways mentioned, what is better and more valued is thought to be prior by nature. That's a fourth way. Ordinary people commonly say of those they especially value and love that they have priority. This fourth way is perhaps the least proper. Okay, so he gave us 2 more. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have the text up. So third way, we could call this order or sequencing. And fourth way, priority in value. And Aristotle says this is the least proper use of the word. He continues, there are then this many ways of speaking of the prior. There would seem, however, to be another manner of priority beside those mentioned. For things which reciprocate, as to implication of existence, that which is in some way the cause of the other's existence might reasonably be called prior by nature. And that there are some such cases is clear. For there being a man reciprocates also to implication of existence with a true statement about it. If there is a man, the statement whereby we say that there is a man is true, and reciprocally. Since of the statement whereby we say that there is a man is true, there is a man. And whereas the true statement is in no way the cause of the actual thing's existence, the actual thing does seem in some way the cause of the statement's being true. It is because the actual thing exists, or does not, that the statement is called true or false. Thus, there are 5 ways in which one thing might be called prior to another. So the 5th way is causality. The prior thing causes the posterior thing. Question, don't existences belong to the topic of ontology? Yeah, I think that's correct. Ontology is kind of the study of being or beings. So yeah, I think that would be accurate. I guess you're probably asking this, what he's saying about implication of existence. Yeah, and causes. Aristotle would probably just use the word metaphysics for that. Okay. Let's look at one final brief passage. This is from Aristotle's Metaphysics. He's going to say more about things prior and posterior. He says, we call things prior and posterior. 1, in some cases, on the assumption that there is a first, that is a beginning in each class, because they are nearer some beginning, determined either absolutely and by nature, or by reference to something, or in some other place determined by nature. For example, the middle or the last place, or to some chance object. And that which is further is posterior. So prior things are nearer, further things are posterior. Write that down. Make a new page for this one. Prior, posterior. We'll just say near and far. Other things are prior in time. Some by being further from the present, that is in the case of past events. For the Trojan War is prior to the Persian because it is further from the present. Others by being nearer the present, that is in the case of future events. For the Nemean games are prior to the Pythian, if we treat the present as beginning and first point because they are nearer the present. Okay, so we have prior in time. Other things are prior in movement. For the things that are nearer the first mover are prior. For example, the boy is prior to the man. And the prime mover also is a beginning absolutely. Others are prior in power. For that which exceeds in power, that is, the more powerful is prior, and such is that according to whose choice the other, that is, the posterior, must follow. So that if the prior does not set it in motion, the other does not move. And if it sets it in motion, it does move. And here choice is a beginning. So he's saying the will, the choice, act of choice is something that sets things in motion. So we have near and far. We have earlier and later. We have prior in movement. So that's interesting. He uses the example of a boy and a man. Somehow the movement of the boy is prior to the movement of the man, in the sense of the man grows out of the boy. Posterior in movement. We have prior in power. We could probably say more powerful and less powerful. Next, he says prior in arrangement. Comment, about the lessons being interesting. You're welcome. Yeah, thank you for being here. It's great to have the questions and the dialogue along the way. And I realize this one's getting long, but I wanted to get through this this kind of second set of terms in Aristotle. So prior and arrangement, these are the things that are placed at certain intervals in reference to some one definite thing, according to some rule. For example, the second member of the chorus is prior to the third. Okay, these then are called prior in this sense. But two, in another sense, that which is prior for knowledge is treated as absolutely prior. Of these, the things that are prior in formula are different from those that are prior in perception. For in formula, universals are prior in perception. For in formula, universals are prior in perception, individuals. That looks like maybe a typo. This is the correct sentence. And in formula, also the accident is prior to the whole, e.g. musical to musical man. For the formula cannot exist as a whole without the part. Yet musicalness cannot exist unless there's someone who is musical. That's a tough one. I'm going to come back to that. Number 3, the attributes of prior things are called prior. For example, straightness is prior to smoothness. For one is an attribute of a line as such, and the other of a surface. Some things then are called prior and posterior in this sense, others for in respect of nature and substance. That is, those which can be without other things, while the others cannot be without them. A distinction which Plato used. If we consider the various senses of being, firstly, the subject is prior, so that substance is prior. Secondly, according as capacity or actuality is taken into account. I'll just highlight the key words here: subject, substance, capacity or actuality. Different things are prior. For some things are prior in respect of capacity, others in respect of actuality. For example, in capacity, the half line is prior to the whole line, and the part to the whole, and the matter to the substance, but in actuality, these are posterior. For it is only when the whole is dissolved that they will exist in actuality. In a sense, therefore, all things that are called prior and posterior are so called according to this fourth sense. For some things can exist without others in respect of generation, for example, the whole without the parts, and others in respect of dissolution, for example, the part without the whole. And the same is true in all other cases. This is somewhat less clear than I wish it were. But I think this line, this section right here is the key idea, which to my mind illuminates what we see in Kant, which is that the prior, it's not prior in time or arrangement or an order of experience. But when Kant uses the idea of a priori, he's talking about those things which can be without other things. The things that are in the sort of experience of knowledge, absolutely essential and necessary, whereas the posterior are those things which may vary and change. I think this, in a very few words, is how Kant thinks about the a priori and the a posteriori. And we'll come to this more, but he's used these terms already a few times, and so I wanted to provide a little background as we are preparing to move into the introduction. Thanks to those of you who are here. It's really wonderful to have the comments along the way. I've really enjoyed the dialogue, and these texts are both challenging and rewarding. So it's great that to have you here. I'm starting an intensive. It's a 6-week virtual intensive called Cultivating an Intellectual Life in May. So if you're interested in that, there's a link to find out more in the description. I'd love to hear from any of you for that, who may be here now or who may be watching later. And I think I will leave it there for today. Thanks again, and hope to see you next time.